HR called me into the conference room without warning on a Thursday afternoon. Their faces looked stiff and rehearsed, like they'd practiced this conversation multiple times before summoning me. They slid a thick folder across the polished table toward me, the sound of paper against wood unnaturally loud in the silent room. Inside were printed complaints I'd never heard of before that moment, accusations that made my stomach drop. My coworkers had accused me of deliberately sabotaging a shared client file that dozens of people depended on for presentations. The damage was apparently severe enough to warrant immediate action and a formal investigation. I asked about the security cameras that covered most of the office floor, thinking they'd clear everything up instantly. They exchanged uncomfortable glances before telling me the footage didn't cover that specific part of the office. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had planned this carefully, choosing their location deliberately. They'd studied the office layout, found the blind spots, and used them against me with precision. I walked out of that room with shaking hands, knowing someone had orchestrated my downfall with calculated cruelty. The hallway felt longer than usual as I made my way back to my desk, fighting tears. My coworkers watched me pass with curious, cautious expressions that made my skin crawl with humiliation. A few months earlier, everything had felt completely normal at work and I'd been comfortable. I'd been with the company for 3 years and had built solid relationships across the entire team. People knew my work style, respected my contributions, and included me in both professional and social circles. Then the atmosphere shifted overnight after a department restructuring announcement came down from upper management. 2 coworkers I'd always gotten along with, Talia from marketing and Brent from operations, suddenly changed toward me without explanation. They began whispering whenever I entered the break room, their conversations dying abruptly the moment I got close enough to hear. During team meetings, they'd share loaded looks when I contributed ideas or suggestions to ongoing projects. My input started getting dismissed more frequently, usually by Brent with some vague excuse about needing fresh perspectives. Tasks I'd been handling successfully for months mysteriously got reassigned to others without any explanation or warning. When I asked my manager about it directly, she said they were balancing workloads more evenly across the department. But the pattern felt deliberate and targeted, like I was being systematically sidelined from projects I'd helped build. I noticed Talia and Brent spending more time together, eating lunch in hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. The exclusion tactics escalated over the following weeks in ways that seemed carefully calculated and intentional. They began leaving me off email chains about shared responsibilities I was supposed to be directly part of. I'd discover crucial updates only when someone else forwarded them to me hours or even days late. When deadlines were missed because I hadn't been informed of last-minute changes to project specifications, Brent would hint during meetings that I was falling behind on communication standards. Small mistakes started appearing in files I hadn't even touched recently, errors that somehow looked suspiciously like my usual work style. My name got attached to problems I knew absolutely nothing about until someone brought them to my attention. The manager started watching me more closely during meetings, her expression harder to read than it used to be. I began documenting everything I did obsessively, taking screenshots of email chains and saving multiple drafts of my work. The tension in the office became something I could feel physically, pressing against my chest every single morning. Something was building toward a confrontation, and I couldn't stop it no matter what I did. I felt like I was watching a slow-motion disaster unfold around me, while everyone else pretended not to notice. The tension exploded publicly during a routine team meeting one Tuesday afternoon in late spring. We were discussing quarterly targets and upcoming client presentations when Brent suddenly brought up concerns about communication issues affecting team performance. He didn't say my name directly, but he glanced at me each time he emphasized certain words or phrases. Talia nodded along supportively, adding that some people weren't responding to messages promptly enough for effective collaboration. The manager's expression shifted as she listened carefully, her pen tapping against her notepad in an annoying rhythm. She announced she'd be monitoring performance more closely across the board, while looking directly at me the entire time. My cheeks burned hot as the rest of the team avoided eye contact with me completely, staring at their laptops. I tried defending myself, explaining I'd been excluded from several recent email chains without my knowledge or consent. But Brent interrupted with false concern dripping from his voice, suggesting maybe I should check my spam folders more carefully. His tone made everyone chuckle nervously, and I felt my authority crumbling in real time before my colleagues. I knew then that Talia and Brent were actively shaping a narrative against me with purpose and coordination. They were building a case piece by piece, and I was watching it happen without any power to stop it. The isolation hit me harder than I expected it would during that difficult week following the meeting. Coworkers who used to eat lunch with me suddenly discovered urgent tasks during lunch hour every single day. They'd sit at different tables across the cafeteria, their laughter floating over to where I sat alone with my food. My Slack messages went unanswered for hours, even simple questions that required quick yes or no responses to function. When I did get replies eventually, they were brief and formal, nothing like our previous casual exchanges and jokes. I found out about a major client update only after someone forwarded it to me as an afterthought at 4. The meeting had happened that morning at 9, and everyone had been discussing it all day around me. The loneliness made me second-guess every interaction, every word I'd ever said in that office over 3 years. I started wondering if I'd done something wrong without realizing it, if I somehow deserved this treatment after all. My confidence crumbled a little more each day as I walked past coworkers who wouldn't meet my eyes. I'd come home exhausted from the effort of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't anymore. Sleep became difficult as I replayed conversations, searching for the moment everything had gone wrong between us all. Everything intensified dramatically when a mid-level management role opened up in our department that spring season. The position came with better pay, more responsibility, and actual influence over team decisions we'd been making together. People congratulated Brent preemptively, assuming he'd get the promotion based on his recent visibility and increasingly vocal presence. He smiled like he'd already won, talking confidently about future plans for the team during coffee breaks with others. Then my name appeared on the shortlist alongside his and 2 others from different departments across the company. The announcement went out in a company-wide email that Friday morning, and I watched Brent's face change in real time. His confident smile vanished completely, replaced by something cold and calculating that made my stomach tighten with new fear. Talia's friendliness, which had already been fading steadily, disappeared entirely after that email went out to the entire office. She stopped even pretending to acknowledge me in the hallways or during meetings, walking past like I was invisible. The air between us became hostile in a way I couldn't ignore anymore, thick with unspoken resentment. I realized then that my presence on that shortlist had made me a genuine threat to their plans. Whatever came next would be worse than anything I'd experienced so far from them both working together. The sabotage attempts started getting bolder and more technical after the promotion announcement went public to everyone. One Monday morning, my login credentials mysteriously stopped working when I tried accessing our shared system database. I tried 3 times before calling it, my frustration building with each failed attempt to access critical files. The technician said someone had requested a password reset from my account over the weekend, triggering the automatic lockout. I denied making any such request, my voice rising slightly as I explained I'd been home all weekend. He looked uncomfortable, mumbling something about security protocols before manually resetting my access and carefully documenting the incident. Later that week, I discovered the incident had been added to my performance review notes without my knowledge or input. My manager mentioned it casually during a check-in, asking if I was having technical difficulties lately with basic systems. The implication was clear. They thought I was either incompetent with technology or lying about the password reset entirely. I felt the walls closing in around me, trap after trap being set while I struggled to defend myself. Nobody seemed to consider that someone else might have deliberately caused the problem to make me look bad. The possibility of sabotage didn't even enter their minds despite how obvious it seemed to me watching it unfold. Something strange happened one afternoon that made my paranoia feel completely justified for the first time in weeks. I returned from lunch at 1:30 to find my desk drawers slightly open, not enough to be immediately obvious. But I noticed because I always closed them completely before leaving my workspace for any reason at all. My notebook had been flipped to a page full of my personal to-do lists and detailed work notes. It sat at an angle I never would have left it, pages bent back deliberately by someone's careless hands. I looked around the office carefully, but everyone seemed focused on their screens, typing away as if nothing unusual had happened. It felt like someone had been searching through my things for something incriminating, some piece of evidence they could use. Nothing was missing that I could tell after checking thoroughly, but everything felt disturbed, contaminated by unknown hands touching my belongings. I started keeping my desk completely clear after that day, taking my notebook home every evening without exception. The violation made my skin crawl every time I sat down at that desk afterward, wondering constantly who had touched my things. I considered reporting it but knew how it would sound: paranoid, unstable, looking for excuses for my declining performance supposedly. The setup began in earnest the following week with the shared client file incident that changed everything for me. I opened the quarterly report we'd all been collaborating on and found multiple serious errors in the sections I'd completed. The mistakes mirrored corrections I had personally made in similar documents before, like someone had carefully studied my entire work history. Brent made sure the manager saw them before I could fix anything or even explain what had happened overnight. He loudly questioned during our morning stand-up why basic quality checks weren't being done on critical client-facing documents. His tone suggested incompetence rather than malice, which made it more effective as everyone listened carefully to his concerns. I tried explaining that someone must have edited the file after my last save, but Brent immediately pulled up the version history. It showed my username as the last editor before the errors appeared, timestamped at 9:42 the previous evening clearly. I hadn't even been in the office at that time, but proving that seemed impossible suddenly without evidence. The manager asked me to be more careful moving forward, her disappointment obvious in her tone and expression. I felt my professional reputation crumbling over something I hadn't done, and nobody believed my protests or explanations at all. The lies escalated beyond what I thought anyone would believe about me or my actual behavior patterns at work. Talia claimed during a casual conversation with our manager that I'd snapped at her in front of summer interns. She described the incident with such specific detail, the exact words I supposedly used, the shocked expressions on the interns' faces. Her performance was so convincing that even I questioned my memory for a brief, terrible moment of self-doubt. I knew it hadn't happened, but her storytelling was flawless and utterly convincing to anyone listening without context. HR emailed me that afternoon requesting a quick clarification meeting about workplace conduct and professional communication standards with colleagues. I sat at my desk staring at the email, feeling the floor beneath me start to crumble into absolute nothing. Every piece of my professional reputation was being systematically destroyed by people I'd once considered friends and trusted colleagues. The worst part was how believable their lies sounded, how easily everyone else seemed to accept their version without question. I felt myself disappearing under the weight of their fabricated narrative about who I supposedly was as a person. My hands shook as I typed a response confirming my attendance at the meeting, knowing I was walking into another trap. The turning point came when a long-term client sent an irritated message to my manager asking why I'd been ignoring them. They claimed I hadn't responded to multiple emails over the past 2 weeks about urgent project updates needing immediate attention. I'd never received any messages from that client during that timeframe, which made absolutely no sense given our relationship. I immediately searched my inbox thoroughly, my sent folder, my trash. Nothing appeared anywhere in my entire email system. Then I noticed a filter rule I'd never created, buried deep in my settings where I rarely looked at all. Several emails from that specific client were being automatically sorted into a hidden folder I didn't even know existed until then. Someone had gone through real effort to access my account and set up this elaborate deception against me deliberately. The technical knowledge required meant it wasn't a simple mistake or misunderstanding. This was deliberate, planned sabotage by someone skilled. I took screenshots of everything with shaking hands, documenting the filter rule and its creation date carefully for evidence. But bringing this to HR felt risky now, like they wouldn't believe me anyway after everything else that had happened. I was being painted as incompetent and dishonest, and every defense I offered sounded like an excuse or deflection. The trap was closing around me, and I was running out of options to prove my innocence to anyone. The full betrayal came when Talia and Brent filed an official joint complaint to HR that same week together. They claimed I had deliberately compromised a major shared document that 3 departments relied on for important client presentations. They listed specific times and dates when I'd supposedly accessed the workstation near the back of the office deliberately. They even had 3 other coworkers willing to verify seeing me at that workstation during lunch hours on exact days. It was a perfect lie, coordinated and detailed enough to seem unquestionably true to anyone reviewing the formal statements. The workstation they mentioned was in a section of the office I rarely went to, far from my usual desk location. But their statement made it sound like I'd been sneaking back there deliberately to cause damage without any witnesses present. The document they referenced did have errors that compromised a client presentation, causing embarrassment for the entire team publicly. HR took their complaint seriously immediately, scheduling an urgent investigation meeting for the following morning without delay. I barely slept that night, replaying every moment, trying to understand how things had gotten this bad so quickly. My career was hanging by a thread, and I had no idea how to defend myself against coordinated lies. The HR interrogation felt more like a trial than a conversation from the moment I walked through the door. They confronted me with printed copies of Talia and Brent's detailed statements, and the precise timeline they'd provided with dates. 3 other coworkers had signed statements saying they'd seen me near that workstation during the times in question without doubt. I insisted repeatedly that I hadn't been anywhere near the workstation at the times they claimed, my voice rising defensively. I explained my usual routine, my lunch schedule, where I typically went during breaks. None of it involved that back area. They reiterated that the security cameras did not cover that specific area of the office, so they couldn't verify anyone's claims. My heart pounded as I realized how perfectly they'd chosen their spot for this accusation, a complete blind spot intentionally. I asked if there were any other cameras nearby that might show the general area or hallways leading to it. They said they'd already checked what was available and found nothing helpful to my case or defense at all. My voice shook as I tried defending myself, but I could see their skepticism growing with every word I spoke. They thought I was lying, making excuses, trying to avoid responsibility for my actions that were clearly documented by witnesses. I left that meeting feeling completely defeated and hopeless about my future. I spent that night imagining every worst-case scenario playing out in excruciating detail until dawn broke outside my window. Losing my job meant losing my apartment within months, draining my small savings account to survive on rent and groceries. My professional reputation would be destroyed before I even started looking for new work in this competitive industry anywhere. The betrayal was suffocating, pressing down on my chest, until breathing felt difficult and painful with each inhale. I'd trusted these people, worked alongside them for years, and they'd turned on me so completely and efficiently without hesitation. My self-worth took a blow so hard I barely recognized myself in the bathroom mirror anymore when I looked. I looked exhausted, defeated, older than I had just months ago before all this started happening to me daily. I considered looking for new work preemptively, updating my resume just to feel some sense of control over something. But the thought of explaining why I was leaving, of future background checks revealing this mess, made everything feel worse. I felt trapped in a nightmare someone else had written for me, powerless to change the ending they'd planned. The unfairness of it all made me want to scream into the darkness until my voice gave out completely. In desperation, I spent the weekend replaying every single event in my head obsessively, searching for any missed details. Something about their workstation claim kept bothering me like a persistent itch I couldn't reach properly or scratch away. That area wasn't near my usual workspace or the routes I took to meetings, the break room, or anywhere else. I rarely had any reason to go to that back section of the office during normal work hours for any purpose. Then I remembered passing by that area once during a lunch break weeks earlier, but I hadn't been alone at all. Someone had been walking right beside me, talking about weekend plans as we headed toward the back exit together casually. I couldn't remember who it was immediately, but the memory felt significant somehow, like a thread I could pull carefully. If I'd been seen in that area before legitimately, maybe someone had used that single innocent moment to build their false timeline. Or maybe there was something else I was missing, some piece of evidence they'd overlooked in their careful planning and coordination. The thought gave me the smallest spark of hope I'd felt in days, a possibility that I wasn't completely helpless. I decided to go back to the office Monday and look around more carefully than I had before this all started. Monday morning, I returned to the office with new determination, replacing the weekend's despair and complete hopelessness about everything. I casually walked toward the back area during my morning coffee break, trying to look natural and unhurried to observers. That's when I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before in all my time working there, a small dome-shaped camera. It was mounted on the opposite corner, partially hidden by ceiling fixtures and easy to miss if you weren't looking upward. The camera wasn't aimed directly at the controversial workstation, but it clearly covered the hallway leading up to it from one angle. Anyone walking up to that workstation would have to pass through the camera's field of view first before reaching the desk. My heart started racing as I realized what this might mean for everything they'd claimed about me in their statements. HR had said the cameras didn't cover that area, but maybe they'd missed this one during their quick, cursory review. Maybe they'd only checked cameras with direct, obvious views and overlooked this corner, mounted entirely by accident or oversight. I forced myself to walk away calmly, not wanting to draw attention to my sudden interest in security equipment placement. My mind raced with possibilities as I returned to my desk, trying to contain my excitement and growing hope finally. I needed to confirm the camera actually worked before getting my hopes up too high about what it might show. During lunch, I casually struck up a conversation with the office maintenance guy who handled minor repairs and equipment. I asked him offhandedly if the dome camera in the back corner was functional or just decorative for security theater. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's tied to the same feed as the hallway cameras, been working fine for years." My heart started racing again, faster than before, as the implications sank in completely and clearly in my understanding. That camera had been recording everything the entire time, including whoever actually accessed that workstation during those specific dates. All the careful planning Talia and Brent had done, choosing a blind spot deliberately, had a fatal flaw in execution. They'd assumed HR checked every camera, but HR had clearly missed this one during their initial review of footage. I had actual proof now, not just my word against theirs anymore, real objective evidence that could save my entire career. I spent the rest of lunch planning exactly how to approach HR without seeming desperate or accusatory in my tone. I needed to be calm, professional, and precise in my request to maximize the chances they'd actually check it. This was my one shot at redemption, and I couldn't afford to mess it up with emotion or poor communication. I sent HR a calm, professionally worded email requesting they review footage from the hallway camera in the back corner immediately. I specified the exact location and the timeframe listed in Talia and Brent's complaint against me carefully and precisely. I made no accusations in the email, no emotional appeals, just a simple, reasonable request for additional evidence they'd missed. They didn't respond for hours, and every minute felt like an eternity as I tried to focus on work. Talia and Brent both looked unusually tense all morning, their confident attitudes from previous days noticeably absent from their behavior. I caught them exchanging worried glances across the office when they thought nobody was watching them closely or paying attention. Brent kept checking his phone compulsively, his knee bouncing under his desk in obvious anxiety and mounting stress about something. Something about my email had clearly rattled them both, which told me everything I needed to know about their guilt. They knew about that camera, or they'd just realized their mistake, and panic was setting in fast for both of them. The office felt different that day, like the air pressure had changed right before a storm breaks violently over everything. I could feel the shift happening, power redistributing itself across the space, and I waited for the inevitable confrontation to come. HR finally responded late that afternoon, asking me to step into the conference room again immediately without any delay. Their expressions had changed dramatically from our previous meeting, this time more stern, more focused, more serious about everything. They said they had additional context they needed to verify before making any final decisions about the formal complaint. I stayed quiet, my pulse pounding in my throat so hard I thought they might hear it across the table. They didn't reveal what they'd found yet, but their body language suggested something significant had shifted completely in their understanding. One of the HR representatives kept glancing at her notes, then at me, then back at the notes repeatedly. The other drummed his fingers on the table in a rhythm that betrayed some kind of internal conflict or discomfort. They thanked me for bringing the additional camera to their attention and said they'd be in touch soon with results. I walked out of that room with my hands still shaking, but this time from cautious hope instead of paralyzing fear. Something had changed in their perception, I could feel it in every word they didn't say to me directly. The investigation was taking a different direction now, and I wasn't the target anymore. They were looking elsewhere for answers. By late afternoon, the office had gone strangely silent around me in a way that felt different from before. People moved through the space like they were walking through a library, voices lowered to whispers whenever they spoke to each other. One coworker I'd barely interacted with before avoided my eyes completely when we passed in the hallway going opposite directions. Another whispered something urgently to a colleague, and then walked away quickly in the opposite direction from me entirely. Brent wouldn't meet my gaze at all anymore, keeping his head down over his keyboard obsessively throughout the remaining day. Talia left early, citing a sudden headache, her face pale and her movements jerky with barely controlled stress and anxiety. I knew something was happening behind the scenes, conversations I wasn't part of but could feel reverberating through the office. The power dynamic in the office had shifted somehow dramatically, and people were repositioning themselves accordingly without any explanation. I kept my head down and continued working, documenting everything as I had been for weeks now obsessively. Whatever came next, I wanted to be ready for it, whether vindication or further disaster awaited me in the coming days. The waiting was almost worse than the accusations had been, suspended between two possible futures with no control over which would arrive. HR called me back in the next morning, and this time they had a laptop set up on the conference table. They asked me to sit, their tones more formal than I'd ever heard from them before this moment in time. They played the hallway footage from the dome camera, and I watched my supposed crimes evaporate frame by frame on screen. The footage showed Brent approaching the workstation during the exact times he'd sworn under oath I was there instead of him. It showed Talia walking by slowly, glancing around nervously like she was keeping lookout for potential witnesses nearby who might see. It showed them both accessing the workstation repeatedly over several days, their movements deliberate and unhurried and completely confident. It showed everything: their lies, their conspiracy, their complete fabrication of events that never happened involving me at all anywhere. My chest tightened as the truth finally breathed in that small conference room, visible and undeniable to everyone present. I didn't cry or celebrate or even speak for several long seconds as the video played through to completion. I just watched justice finally appear after weeks of suffocating under lies nobody else could see but me alone. HR apologized stiffly for not catching this footage sooner, their professional masks cracking slightly with obvious discomfort and embarrassment. They said they'd proceed with formal disciplinary action against both employees for falsifying statements and tampering with company systems intentionally. I nodded silently, still processing that this nightmare was finally ending in my favor after all the suffering I'd endured recently. HR said they needed to conduct further review of the entire situation before taking any official action immediately. Within 24 hours, both Brent and Talia were suspended pending a formal investigation into their conduct and conspiracy. Their desks sat empty the next morning, personal items still scattered across them like crime scene evidence now under scrutiny. The coworkers who had signed statements supporting Brent and Talia's version suddenly acted confused about everything that had happened. They claimed they must have been mistaken about the dates, or confused about who they actually saw back there. They distanced themselves from the conspiracy instantly and completely, abandoning their former allies without hesitation or loyalty at all. I watched this unfold with a strange detachment, like I was observing it happen to someone else entirely in a movie. The office gossip machine kicked into overdrive, whispers following me everywhere, but with different content now than before this revelation. People who'd ignored me for weeks now offered awkward smiles and uncomfortable greetings in the hallways daily, without exception. The sudden shift in how everyone treated me felt surreal and disorienting after months of systematic isolation and cruelty. I didn't know how to respond to their sudden friendliness, so I remained polite but distant with everyone around me. A week later, both Brent and Talia were officially terminated for falsifying statements and tampering with work accounts deliberately. HR cleared my record entirely, removing every incident they'd manufactured from my performance reviews and personnel files completely. The promotion decision was delayed for re-evaluation, while they sorted through the mess and political fallout from the situation. I felt the ground settle beneath me for the first time in months, solid and reliable again under my feet. The constant anxiety that had been my companion finally loosened its grip on my chest and shoulders noticeably throughout each day. I could breathe deeply again without that crushing weight pressing down on my lungs constantly throughout each day at work. My manager sent a brief email apologizing for not seeing what was happening sooner, her words professional but hollow-sounding. The 3 co-workers who'd backed up the false statements received written warnings and mandatory ethics training as consequences for their roles. Nobody else faced consequences for their part in my isolation, their complicit silence as I was slowly destroyed publicly. The injustice of that still strung, but I had my job and my reputation back, which felt like enough. I'd survived something I thought would destroy me completely, and that felt like its own kind of victory against them all. People who had ignored me before now treated me with cautious respect mixed with obvious guilt about their behavior. They held doors open, asked how my weekend was, included me in lunch plans like nothing had ever happened before. I accepted their gestures without warmth, polite but distant in every interaction we had moving forward into the future. My manager privately thanked me one afternoon for handling everything professionally throughout this difficult situation and investigation. I accepted her words without offering forgiveness, because the wounds were still too fresh and too deep to heal. She'd chosen to believe the lies without ever really questioning them or investigating properly from the start of everything. The promotion eventually came through 6 weeks later, along with a small raise and a corner office with windows. I moved my belongings methodically, packing up 3 years of accumulated items into boxes efficiently and quietly without fanfare. Coworkers congratulated me enthusiastically, their voices too loud and their smiles too bright with overcompensation for their previous behavior. I thanked them all politely, but felt nothing resembling triumph or satisfaction in their attention now after everything. The experience had changed something fundamental in how I viewed workplace relationships and trust between colleagues forever going forward. I'd learned that people would believe convenient lies over inconvenient truth, and that lesson would stay with me always. I didn't celebrate when I officially started in my new management role that Monday morning in autumn air. I simply cleaned my new desk at my new workspace, arranged my few personal items carefully, and breathed slowly. The truth hadn't come fast enough to prevent all the damage, but it had come clean eventually when it mattered. The silence that followed felt better than any applause or recognition possibly could have at that point in time. I'd learned that vindication doesn't erase the trauma of being systematically betrayed by people you trusted daily for years. Some mornings I still felt the phantom weight of those accusations pressing against my chest, unexpectedly, without warning signs. But I also learned that careful documentation and persistent truth-seeking could eventually cut through even the most elaborate lies. My new team looked at me with curiosity mixed with respect, having heard some version of what happened to me. I focused on building something better this time, more carefully, with clearer boundaries and less naive trust in colleagues. The camera that saved me still hung in that back corner, a small dome nobody noticed unless they looked. Sometimes I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything based on one overlooked security device in the ceiling. But mostly, I just moved forward, one documented day at a time, quietly stronger than before it all began. I'd survived their worst, and that knowledge changed how I approached everything in my professional life moving forward now.